Welcome to Moral Politics. I'm your host, Bill Wolford. We remember the victims of 9/11 this 10th anniversary. Approximately 2,751 lost their lives in the collapse of the World Trade Center towers. Along with losing their lives, they suffered the indignity of being buried in a landfill along with the building rubble. But there may be an indignity even greater. One man, an American, profited enormously from the 9/11 tragedy. Dr. Ibrahim Soudy joins me. We discuss the 9/11 suspicion surrounding Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center towers.
Thank you.
Dr. Soudy, I mentioned 9/11 suspicion and Larry Silverstein. Is there some kind of dark cloud that's over the head of Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center towers?
Well, the cloud might be as big as the cloud of dust that resulted from the collapse of the 3 buildings of the World Trade Center. I have no doubt that Larry Silverstein is a key element in what happened on 9/11 and the so-called war on terror, which is a war without an end, it seems to be. And then you have people who perished in Afghanistan. You have over 1 million people who got killed in Iraq, and then you have also the many thousands of Americans who lost their lives. And so it's really an event that we should not put aside and think that we know everything about it. In fact, the United States of America until today has not provided a single piece of evidence to prove that 19 Arab Muslims committed 9/11.
But let's get back to the suspicion surrounding Larry Silverstein. What makes him suspicious of some complicity in 9/11?
Well, he himself, during an interview, somehow slipped his tongue and said there was a decision made to pull Building 7 down, and the term pull is used as a euphemism for destroying a building by explosives. And again, as a structural engineer, I will explore that a little bit. If you want to make a human being collapse, you try to pull or push his legs from underneath him, and that makes him collapse. This is exactly what happens in engineered demolition, where you pull the columns of a building so the building comes down under its own gravity.
Well, you know, if it wasn't a controlled demolition, then the terrorist went to a lot of trouble to collapse a building into its own footprint symmetrically and at free fall speeds, which is the definition of a controlled demolition.
Exactly, absolutely.
They would have done more damage not doing that.
Exactly, and even people like Dan Rather and Peter Jennings on 9/11 said that what they were looking at was exactly similar to what happens when a team of professionals brings down a building.
Reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Dan never repeated these words after this first day. In fact, we didn't see this building coming down after 9/11.
Well, we have a clip here of the Larry Silverstein Pull It video, the PBS special, and we'll go to that now.
Larry Silverstein, the owner virtually of the building and the builder of it, said on a PBS report, well, at a certain point, the fire chief and I got together and we said, you know, there's been so much loss of life, let's not take any chances, and we decided to pull it.
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it, and they made that decision to pull.
Pull it is the slang for bringing it down by controlled demolition.
We can see clearly that the building came down, and what we were talking about, a symmetrical free fall into its footprint. So pull it is the term used in demolition industry for bringing down a building. But doesn't that suggest something? If the building was pulled on 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon of 9/11, when were the charges set?
Oh, absolutely. It takes days, if not weeks, to put the charges in a building in order to bring it down by demolition. And before we move from this point, it's not just that he himself admitted. BBC, the British broadcast agency, announced that the building came down more than 20 minutes before the building actually came down.
Now, you're referring to the Jane Stanley piece there with the BBC World, and we will actually play that piece now for our viewers as well.
The BBC announces the collapse 20 minutes before it happened. It's true, Jane Stanley is here announcing it. She says the 47-story Solomon Brothers building close to the World Trade Center has also collapsed. And there it is standing behind her. The BBC apologizes for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. But does that make them psychic?
Now, if that isn't a smoking gun, I don't know what is. The building is standing, but announced that it's fallen. So it does look like a controlled demolition, but what role did Larry play and when?
He got the lease for 99 years, just less than 3 months before the event itself, and quickly somehow
Amazing timing.
Absolutely, yeah. And he also somehow quickly got terrorism insurance on the building. And you
had the foresight to do that?
That's a real strike of luck.
You know, some of the blogs I looked at said that it didn't make economic sense to become the leaseholder of the World Trade Center 1 and 2. They were asbestos white elephant.
Or it had asbestos in it, and it was going to cost so much money to bring it up to standards and remove that asbestos from it.
And another 800, I heard that it totaled about 800 million for the electrical cooling, the corrosion, and the retrofits that were needed.
Yeah, from an economic point of view, there was quite a number of issues with the buildings that would make it not actually economically a good investment.
And the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey wanted to actually demolish the buildings themselves, but they were refused permit to do it.
It's part of the asbestos issues that we all know about.
Is it a fair conclusion that the Trade Center towers didn't make economic sense standing, that they made economic sense collapse?
Yeah, the man paid, I think, about $15 million,
That's his own money.
Ended up having over $4 billion in insurance, and also have the buildings being removed without paying a penny. We, the taxpayers in America here, paid the bill for the cleanup of
now that it does raise a lot of eyebrows, and I guess that's why the blogs are just full of suspicion aimed at Larry Silverstein for what has been dubbed the heist of the century, and the crime of the
century. Yeah.
Were there others involved?
I think Lowy from Australia, I think, was one of his partners, and he is also, like Larry, a Zionist Jew as well.
That's Frank Lowy, the Zionist.
The billionaire from Australia, and he was a member of the Haganah at the beginning of his life, and
which was the Israeli
terrorist group that helped establish the Zionist state. Yeah, and other people as well. And in terms of coincidences and luck, Larry himself used to have breakfast at the World Trade Center, and somehow, amazingly, on that day he missed his breakfast. His 2 children, a daughter and a girl and a boy, used to work at the World Trade Center. Somehow, also amazingly, on that day, they did not show up to work.
So that's why they're calling Larry Silverstein Lucky Larry, even though some people think luck didn't have a lot to do with it.
I think he must be really extremely lucky. Yeah.
What about Louis Eisenberg, the chairman of the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey? He
happened to be the boss of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and he was involved in the deal that landed that fabulous thing on Larry's plate. There was, I think, another higher bidder for the thing, but somehow the negotiations between the Port Authority, led by Eisenberg, with that higher bidder failed, and then that landed the thing in Larry's plate.
So if I'm following you correctly, the suspicions surrounding Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center, relates to this amazing timing, this good fortune of just putting $14 million into a deal that now, after insurance, has netted $4.6 billion. He doesn't get all of that, but he gets a substantial sum of it. That there is this relationship with the chairman of the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, Louis Eisenberg.
Eisenberg, yeah.
Who was a Goldman Sachs executive involved in a sex scandal. And people wonder why he ever had that role. But there's some relationships already, and now with Frank Lowry and other investors as well. I think Frank Lowry is the billionaire Zionist that's involved. It's looking a little atypical.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I think the importance of the event itself in terms of the consequences of it suggests that we should not set aside any aspect of the events and try to really investigate it. And just we heard a few minutes ago Larry himself admitting that at least one of the buildings was brought down by a decision to pull it. That's in itself actually is amazing. And I'm wondering, the commission, the 9/11 commission report, for example, did not really like even ask Larry Silverstein to come meet the commission and try to explain how did he say, why did he say that, and on what basis, and what exactly happened, and so on.
But you know, what you're suggesting is that maybe the World Trade Center 7, which he owned previously, came down in a controlled demolition, which begs the question of when were those charges set? They couldn't have been set that afternoon.
So negates the theory of NIST, the National Institute of Standard and Technology, that the damage caused by the fire due to the damage due to the impact of the airplanes, followed by the fire, is what caused the buildings to collapse. But building number 7 was not hit by an airplane at all, so how do they explain that? And the steel frame buildings never collapsed from a fire before in the history of humanity.
And a lot of the firefighters gave contradictory reports to what we're getting officially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about the payday itself. Heist of the century is being referred to in the context of suspicions of 9/11 and Larry Silverstein.
You mean the crime of the century?
Crime of the century and the heist of the century.
Yeah.
What was netted?
Billions of dollars, of course. I'm not aware of any
insurance. Right?
Yeah, any investment in the world where you can put $14 million and you get back over $4 billion.
But
That's
I understand that the Building 7 itself was almost like a Fort Knox, wasn't it? Full of good stuff, full of gold and silver and bullion.
Well, it was also full of documents from banking institutions, financial institutions. And some U.S. agencies as well.
Now, he's going to make out like a bandit, and he's claiming 2 occurrences, which a lot of legal scholars are saying is a very exotic, if not a sham, scam argument. How's he getting away with it?
Making the claim that it was not just one attack, it was 2, because each building was attacked by a different airplane. But this is part of the very clever business sense that some people are known for, and he's just using it as part of his nature.
He is a heavyweight lawyer, Herbert Wachtell, or Wachtell Lippman. He's the one, I think, that was credited with inventing this double indemnity claim.
And it gets you a few more $1 billion. Yeah.
Is there any doubt in your mind that if the charges were set on Building 7, and it looks like it, a lot of people are saying it looks like controlled demolition. So how do we get there? Let's work back. I mean, if it's a controlled demolition, but by definition, a free fall into its own footprint symmetrically. Buildings don't fall that way normally. They tip over. They actually do a lot more damage. And if it was done by terrorists, we've already noted that that's probably what they would want anyhow. It begs the question of when those charges were set, but it also begs the questions of World Trade Center 1, World Trade Center 2. Didn't they also exhibit free fall?
Just as much as Building 7 did. And again, if you look at the videos of recording of the collapse, you see that the initial theory that was kicked around, that the upper portion above the impact acted like a driving hammer to push the other one down. I think that's ridiculous, actually, because if you look at the videos carefully, you find that the upper portions are disintegrating before they even start collapsing. So there was no really that rigid block. In fact, one of them started tilting quite a bit before the collapse started. And again, I will speak here from my knowledge as a structural engineer.
For viewers' sake, you are a PhD in structural engineering.
I was part of the design of high-rise buildings before and big structures as well. If the impact happened on floor 95 or floor 78 and a few floors above, all the floors below that were intact. And if the collapse is natural, then we should see a multi-layered.
And the pancake collapse.
Pancake collapse is really true. Then we should see all the bottom floors up to the level of the impact, like sitting on top of each other in a way that you can at least recognize them. But everything was turned into dust and into pulverized material. And I'm not aware of anything that can actually make concrete turn into dust other than explosives. Yeah.
Well, of course, the 9/11 people have been making that argument for a long time. Now, when we talk about Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center, being complicit here, at least that's what the blogs are alleging, how can we view this other than as just another delusional conspiracy?
This is not, we are not talking about conspiracies now. We are talking about collapse of buildings, and I think like I said, I am qualified to speak about collapse of buildings as a structural engineer myself. We have to talk about if there is now explosive in the dust of the building, which I think Professor Stephen Jones has proven that there is actually explosive material in the dust of the World Trade Center collapses. Then who enabled people to put those explosives in, those charges in? And again, Larry is the owner, virtual owner of the complex.
So you're alleging that whoever controls access to the building, the security, the staff, the utilities, the maintenance.
Goes without saying. And that points the finger at one person in particular, and that's Larry Silverstein.
Yeah. And we know that he is an ardent Zionist, and we know that anyone who is an ardent, not just a typical Zionist, but an ardent Zionist, probably would have a relationship with Mossad.
I think Mossad itself admits that any Jew in the world is part of its apparatus.
And so an ardent Zionist who's the leaseholder of the World Trade Center towers that are suspiciously looking like they came down in a controlled demolition, symmetric fall, no pancake collapse, their own footprint against what would have been the greatest resistance path. And it's not what a terrorist would want. They would want them to topple over, but they didn't. Now, could Mossad have its fingerprints in cahoots with someone like an insider alleged to be Larry Silverstein? Could they have their fingerprints on it?
That's very possible. And you have to ask the question. I think it's very famous when you do an investigation. The first thing you say is qui bono, who benefits? And then look at the events that happened after 9/11, and you find that the biggest winner in this whole thing is the Zionist state by the name of Israel. Yeah. It now has America doing the wars for it, destroying Iraq. Now it might go into war with Iran.
And a big inducement for some of its helpers who are complicit.
Absolutely, yeah. And not just that, but also look at the amount of profit Israelis are making now by being experts on terrorism and security all over the world in airports.
Interesting point you raised, because Naomi Klein did a piece to that effect, saying that before 9/11 there was virtually no security industry in Israel. Post 9/11, it's grown to be a multi-billion-dollar, one of the cash cows for Israel.
It's also one of the main driving things about Islamophobia in the United States and in the West in general, is that they are going to teach you how to combat terrorism. And it's amazing that they have gone so far to even invite, I think, over 80 U.S. Congress men and women to go to Israel, and some of those Congress people say that they will take advantage of the trip because they want to learn how to combat terrorism. So this is a very, very good actually scheme, not just to make profit, but to portray yourself as an expert on security. And
not only did they hatch the plot, but if those people that are alleged to be complicit were really complicit, then they are actually doing a very good job of getting away with it with all the pre and post helpers.
Another Zionist Jew by the name Michael Chertoff, who was the Homeland Security Secretary in the U.S. here in the Bush administration, and he's now selling these X-ray machines that are filling the U.S. ports, and poor Americans are lining up in front of those machines, get their bodies X-rayed. God knows what that will cost to their health and in the future. But Michael Chertoff is becoming a billionaire himself.
Is definitely what you would class as an ardent Zionist. It brings up the real question now: was there a manifesto? It seems like we've heard of PNAC and the clean break document that traces back to Netanyahu, and it did call for a new Pearl Harbor. And did we see a new Pearl Harbor with the collapse of 9/11?
If you go to the website of Project for New American Century, which I think is what you refer to when you say PNAC, you find that the people who wrote the manifesto, more than half of them are Zionist Jews. More than half of them. And then they are writing there that in order to bring the greatness of America again, you need to increase the defense spending. But absent a major event like a new Pearl Harbor, it will be very hard to justify to the American people increasing the defense spending, especially after the collapse of the main threat to America, which is the Soviet Union. So now you take that, and then you find that people like Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith become members of the Bush administration, and then all of a sudden they have now the opportunity of implementing the theory of new Pearl Harbor. They come up with the idea of 9/11 to do that, and who better than Larry Silverstein to enable the whole thing to work? So if you look at it actually intelligently enough, you find that it's
big pictures
pattern actually that's happening for all this thing to come together, and so many Zionist Jews are involved in that process at every step of the way.
During and after
every step of the way, yeah. So it actually deserves. I'm not saying now that I have every piece of evidence to prove that they have done everything that we're talking about, but there is enough evidence in there to justify a real clear investigation, unlike the sham called the 9/11 Commission report. And guess what? The 9/11 Commission report itself is authorized by another Zionist Jew by the name of Philip Zelikow, who was the executive director of the 9/11 Commission report.
But I have to put a question to you. Why would Israel attack America?
Well, Israel attacked America before, in case you didn't know, and that was in 1967. The USS Liberty, that was a ship owned by the United States of America, was attacked by Israeli airplanes and Israeli Navy during the June war with Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. So it's not new that Israel attacked America. I think Israel has been exploiting America since its inception, and that's very obvious in the American elections, in the U.S. Congress. You see that very. There are so many Americans who are homeless, jobless, foreclosure, but the U.S. aid to Israel is continuing, and it's really amazing it's really amazing you mentioned that, because I think within the last few days, the U.S. State Department has given a grant to an Israeli research group to research the anti-Semitism all over the world. So here are the tax dollars of the U.S. Are going directly to support research institutes in Israel itself. Yeah.
Now, we alluded to the Mossad. We know that they could have been expert enough to, if the theory is to gel, that there was a controlled demolition, the charges had to be set. They could have had access, because it looks like there was an ardent Zionist who was the leaseholder, Larry Silverstein, that had access, controlled the access to those buildings, all of them. And Mossad, interestingly, operates by a motto. They shamelessly tout their motto.
By deception shall you do war.
And this is a deception in plain sight, and they're getting away with it. So it's really, really shocking that people aren't asking. That we look at some of these inconsistencies, these irregularities, and the fact that there are so many Zionists that are involved in the before, the during, and the after, and that there was this manifesto document. It's almost like it's just in front of us. And people, I think J. Edgar Hoover had a quote, and it's one I like, that people just can't come to grips with a truly shocking set of facts, and they will tend to deny them, by J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, detectives work with means, motives, and opportunity when they try to find their suspects to a crime. Do you see Larry Silverstein operating with means, motive, and opportunity on the events of 9/11?
I think there is enough evidence, there is enough big cloud on people like Larry Silverstein and others that the American people, I think, should really pay attention and try to study this very carefully and demand a better investigation from their government instead of this sham investigation that we have seen. I don't know about you, but I read the 9/11 Commission report, and I think actually it's an insult to the American intelligence.
Dr. Ibrahim Soudy, I want to thank you for this discussion on the 9/11 suspicions that surround Larry Silverstein. There's a lot on the blog, in the blogosphere, about his role. All detectives would probably agree that he had means, motive, and opportunity. If you apply the test of Key Bono, or who benefits, certainly he's come off with the heist of the century, $14 million invested, and he's going to line his pockets, and it's shameful that he's making billions off of the tragedy of 9/11. Thank you very much for this courageous show.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Compare these explosions to a known explosion on the left here. Outward arching streamers, pyroclastic volumes of dust, symmetrical display like a mushroom. Does it look like a gravitational collapse to you?
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Dan never repeated these words after this first day. In fact, we didn't see this building coming down after 9/11.